Good evening and good afternoon, everybody, this afternoon, and welcome to this, our third monthly session through the BRMI. And a reminder that at the end of this and during this, first of all, you can ask questions. Just type your questions in and they will be moderated, and I'll ask them, answer them appropriately, either as we go along or perhaps at the end of this. And once we are done, within a couple of days, you can go on the BRMI site, and of course, the entire presentation will be there for to listen again, to review, or whatever. So we're going to talk about the immune system today, which, there's probably less familiarity, I would say, in general, with this system than most other systems, and some of the words that I will speak about today, you probably, or many people, will not be as familiar with, and that's because they're not exactly the words that are come up in conversation. Last month we spoke about the endocrine system, and most people have heard of the thyroid or the adrenal gland or cortisol levels or estrogen and progesterone and that kind of thing. But when we come into the understanding the immune system, some of the words are going to be relatively new. So as much as I have possible, I have tried to keep this to an aspect of regular conversation. So, the first thing I'll say about the immune system is that it's very complicated. And so what I'm going to talk about is pretty cursory, but I think still important. Well, in fact, it's very important. And at the end of this, the hope is that you will have a pretty basic understanding of some of the types of things that, you hear about flu shots, you hear about allergy shots, you hear about the autoimmune reactions. People think that they get sick because their immune system is weak, or they have an autoimmune disease because their immune system is outregulated, or they have cancer because their immune system isn't working. And some of that is true and some of that is not true, as we'll see. And obviously the main focus of this is, what are we going to do about it, or what can you do about it for yourself, for your family, on an ongoing basis, to try and basically keep your immune system, which is like every other system, just one part of an important cog in one big wheel, where if one cog does not work efficiently, it totally interferes with every other organ system that's not working efficiently. So just a couple of definitions to start off with. The immune system that we're going to talk about is made up, as we'll see, of cells, tissues, and different size molecules. Immunology by itself, there is immunologists who are specialists in this world of immunology, which looks at the structure and the function of how the immune system is supposed to work. Immunity, to have immunity, suggests that it's resistance to pathogens, which we'll talk about, which is from the Latin word. And then an immune response. How does the immune system respond when it is subject to something foreign to it? Or in some cases, it recognizes it as being foreign, even though it's not foreign. So we look at these components as far as immunity is concerned. So the immunity is the body's attempt to deal with these types of things. And what you see on here, for the most part, are microbes in the form of viruses or a fungus or a bacteria or a parasite. Those we typically, as what we tend to think of as microbes. But in addition to that, something that your body is dealing with on an everyday basis is toxicity. Whether it's in the air that you breathe in, whether it's in something that you touch, whether it's in food that you eat. We look at pollution, of course, that we know. And I guess if we were over in Hawaii, as everybody's been witnessing, the toxic, what are they calling it, VOG the fumes that are coming off from the sulfur and the mixture of the lava and the water, making that air to breathe very toxic, per se. So we have these types of things that our immune system is attempting to deal with. So the immune system is, unlike pretty much everything else that I've ever talked about, is not an organ system like the cardiovascular system, like the endocrine system, like the digestive system, like the nervous system. So it's a combination of a whole variety of things, and mixed into all those recognized organ systems is the immune system. So we call it a functional system because there's bits and parts of it that are scattered throughout. So the skin, as we'll see, is a very important part of the immune system. So is the lining in your nose, so is the lining in the back of your throat, so is the lining in your lungs, so is the lining in your digestive tract. Your tears are part of the immune system. Your saliva is part of the immune system. Mucus made in your digestive system is part of the immune system. But oh, lo and behold, so is our blood. So are white blood cells that we tend to think about, that are part of fighting microbes. Oh, but look, our bone marrow is also part of that because that's where these cells are made. The liver, makes a lot of components that are associated with the immune system also. And then, of course, we have the all-important lymphatic system that we have talked about many times. And then most tissues have some type of immune cells. So we have these three areas of the immune system. There's organs that make up this, cells and molecules. So the organs that are part of the immune system are the all-important tonsils and adenoids. And for those of you who were born in the 50s and 60s, you may not have tonsils and adenoids because it was prominent and typical in those days that the tonsils would be removed, thinking, oh, they just get swollen and sore, they cause us to have sore throats. What do we need them for? Let's just take them out. Well, we now know that that's not so common anymore because we know that our tonsils form as one of our first lines of defense of anything that basically gets into our oral cavity or in through our nose. The thymus, we'll talk about. Lymph nodes, you know about. The spleen is a digestive organ. Peyer's patches are in the digestive system. The appendix that people have thought is kind of expendable, but once again, it's not so expendable as we realize, because only probably in the last 5 or 6 years have they realized what the real function of the appendix is. And what the function of the appendix is to literally store our microbiome, which we now know is so critical to our immune system. And so at times, we'll call it olden times, before we could go to the Whole Foods and get a probiotic, the appendix was actually your reservoir for microbiome. If you had some form of an acute gastroenteritis, where you would have chronic diarrhea, let's say for a few days, it would wipe out your GI system, flush out a lot of your microbiome. Well, where did it come from to replenish? Well, the appendix became that specific organ. So in addition to nodes, you have the lymph vessels, and of course, once again, the bone marrow. So we know that the lymphatic system, if you heard my previous presentations, are basically, the unforgotten system I tend to think about, because there are no lymphologists. There's no specialists in this system, mainly because there's no prescription medications that one can take for that. And you see from this picture, we have a lymph system that entirely covers our whole body. In our neck and groin area, we have lymph nodes, but deep inside our chest and deep inside our digestive system, we have many, many more lymph nodes, and there are hundreds of these things. So we see the Peyer's patches I mentioned, we see the appendix, et cetera, et cetera. An incredibly important part. Therefore, one of the most critical things you need to do for your immune system is to make sure your lymphatic system is working efficiently. How do we do that? We move. Moving your body on an everyday basis is one of the best ways to do that. Of course, hydrating yourself properly, dry skin brushing, castor oil packs, little chi machines, lymphatic massage, ST8s, lymph stars, etc., are all ways that our body has the ability to move the lymph system. And so the lymphatic system produces lymphocytes, which are the second part of the immune system, which are the cells in the immune system. We also have monocytes and macrophages, which are little Pac-Man, and they go around, and when they find something that they don't like, they literally digest it. They eat it up and to try and digest it. And granulocytes are part of our white blood cells. Neutrophils we will tend to see are for bacteria. Eosinophils are for parasites, and they show up in allergy situations. And basophils are sort of scavengers within the immune system itself. So we see these different types of cells from that picture. So you start to realize how complex and how all involved this particular organ system, which once again is a functional system as opposed to a single organ. It's in every cell of the body, or in every area of the body, maybe a better term, because every cell needs some type of protection, and there's different aspects that allow this to happen. And then you break it down into the specific molecules of the immune system, specifically antibodies, which you hear about. The body makes antibodies. That's supposedly why vaccines are important, so that you would make an antibody. Complement cytokines, interleukins, and interferons are probably words that may not be familiar to you because they're not sort of everyday literature, everyday conversations. But these are molecules that form an important component of what the functions of the immune system that it does. So we know that most people mostly think of the immune system as about colds and flus, specifically a virus or a bacterial infection. And then when you start thinking about it, oh yeah, this person has cancer. Maybe their immune system wasn't up to snuff. Or, they needed an organ transplant. Why do they have to take all these medications to prevent an organ transplant rejection? But in addition to doing that, the immune system also takes care of our old broken down cells, most specifically our red blood cells that carry oxygen around and die every 3 months or so, and those worn out cells have to be broken down and recycled. The immune system is also responsible for identifying abnormal cells, aka cancer cells, and the idea is that potentially, since there are millions and millions of new cells being made every day, there's probably about 1 million potential cancer cells that are made on a daily basis for everybody. And if our immune systems are not in ideal shape, tip-top shape, that cancer cell may go undetected. And that's what forms the seed that 10, 15, 20, even 30 years later, you may be ended up diagnosed with some type of cancer. Cancer isn't something that showed up 2 months ago, may have been diagnosed 2 months ago, but it actually has been something that has been going on for a very long period of time. As I mentioned, there's about organ transplants, rejections, and then we have these inappropriate responses that some of you are probably having right now as far as allergies are concerned, as the springtime pollens of, especially in the East, where you have had a late spring and finally everything is coming into blossom, and the 80+ autoimmune problems that we'll talk about. So just what's the difference, first of all, between a virus and a bacteria? We know that colds and flus are typically caused mostly by viruses, or much more common than bacterial type infections. But the thing about a virus that's different from a bacteria is that a virus has no machinery to basically be able to reproduce itself. So what it does, as it suggests, it hijacks our own cells, our healthy cells, in order to be able to reproduce themselves. And viruses, because they are within our cells, hijacking our information, antibiotics they can't work, because if they were to work, you'd kill your own cells. So that's why they don't work. That's different, of course, than bacteria, that by themselves are a living organism. They have their own metabolism, they have their own DNA, and therefore they can reproduce themselves. So in these cases, an antibiotic or an herbal product that basically does the same type thing has the ability to target the bacteria. Specifically, what they mostly do is to try and break down the outside wall, if you like. And as soon as the outside wall breaks, all the contents spill out from the inside, and of course the bacteria dies. And that's the whole idea of why antibiotics are used, to try and of course what you're left with now is, instead of a bacteria intact, you're left with thousands of bits of bacteria that what are we going to do with them? And of course we got to get them out of the system. And a lot of the symptoms that are associated with having a cold or a flu, especially when taking, some type of medication, is how do we get rid of the toxicity of all these bits and pieces. So we have viruses, we have bacteria, and then of course we have that lovely little girl holding a flower, and then about to experience allergies. So how does the body defend itself? What are the lines of defense beyond getting things inside your body? So the first thing is, of course, is the outside. It's your skin. So your skin is the first barrier for your immune system. And then, when you get a cold, you typically have a runny nose, or you get some mucus in your lungs that you end up coughing up. So why is that there? Because that's how the body is perceiving that you will be able to expel whatever it is that the body doesn't want to have around. So if you take something to stop mucus, if you take something to dry up mucus, you're going totally against what the immune system is trying to allow you to do. And so what that does is that, for all intents and purposes, it simply will prolong whatever it is that you're dealing with. So the best way, of course, to dealing with a cold is to rest, it's to do neti pots, it's to take some vitamins, it's just to upregulate your system, not to try and dry up your system. It's to drink more water, to try and get more mucus to literally flush itself out. Now, as we know, sometimes those barriers are not sufficient. So if somebody has a skin issue on the outside, that, there's a break in the skin, whether it's a cut or otherwise, that allows, something foreign to the body to get inside. That's when we basically then the body recruits what's called the innate immune system, which are some of these phagocytes, which are these little Pac-Men, we'll say. But you also get inflammation, and you also get a fever. Fever, as we'll hear, is a good thing, and you want to encourage fevers. You should never want to lower a fever. You should want to get it as high as possible, because it is the best way that first of all, you can tune up your immune system, and it's the best way that the body can, as quickly as possible, get back into a state of balance. And one step beyond that then becomes the adaptive immune system, which is where we get these different types of cell-mediated and humoral immunities. So we have the innate, which is what we call the non-adaptive, for the first line of defense. And then we have the acquired, which is the second line of defense. Both of those, of course, following the first line of defense, which is the skin and the mucous membranes. Hopefully we haven't lost you yet with some of these terms. The differences between these two become the innate immunity is just like it's there. You get exposed and it's immediately active. The adaptive immunity, which we could say are making antibodies, takes a while for the factory to gear up, enough energy to be able to make this antibody. The antibodies are quite specific to the different types of antigen. An antigen is something that is foreign to us, and the body doesn't recognize it. So that's a foreign invader. We need to deal with it. The innate, however, does not. It's not antigen. Just deals with anything that's not there. It says, "Oh, Pac-Man, let's have a meal." So it literally gobbles it all up. However, there's no memory in the innate immune system. There is a memory in the adaptive immunity. So adaptive immunity is, as we'll see, is the idea of immunizations and vaccines. And we'll discuss a little bit whether that makes any sense to try and do that. So here's our two parts, external defenses and internal defenses, and how these two systems ultimately will interact with each other. So we have the mechanical barriers that I talked about, and I'll share just a little bit more. We have these humoral mechanisms, which are lysozymes, which are enzyme-like things, complement, once again, interferon, and then we have our cellular defense. You see those lists of those cells that are underneath, which for all intents and purposes, once again, are all part of your white blood cells that are part of our immune system. So this is what happens typically when you have something that is technically attacking you. And the reality is that's happening every day, every instant that you're around, that we're surviving. So if we didn't have an immune system, of course, we would succumb. We wouldn't make it past a couple of years of life because we would basically succumb to all these foreign things that we get exposed to. So we have first our external defenses, which once again are our skin, our mucous membranes, and our secretions. If it gets by that first line of defense, it's like, you know, you have 3 lines of defense. If the first line is breached, now the second line has to come into play, which is the internal. Both those make up the innate immune system. Once again, no memory, not antigen specific, and it acts immediately. If the second line of defense fails, now we get into the third line of defense, which is what we call the acquired immunity, which is the humoral response or the antibody response. So that's the overview. This is more the, you know, just a different look at the same type of thing. So the three main aspects of the anatomical barriers: skin, the cilia that we'll show you another picture of in a sec, and then, you know, there's a reason that we make tears, not just from crying, which is okay because it flushes things out, but you know, why do people with allergies constantly have itchy, red, runny eyes? It's because literally these tears are being produced to flush that antigen out of the eye. So you put eye drops and you try and stop it, and of course the allergy just keeps going on and it doesn't get us anywhere. We want to sweat because that's a normal way that the body can remove toxicity. We have hydrochloric acid in our stomach that if we eat something that is particularly harmful to us, you know, it's like putting, you know, a bacteria into an acid soup, and of course then immediately the acid will break the cell wall and the bacteria dies. And then we have these lysozymes that I said are basically tears. We also have our normal flora. We have talked about, if you've done our previous webinars or were at our seminar a couple of weeks ago in Louisville, you heard about the flora. You hear about the flora actually all the time now because it's now become one of the more realistic ideas of how we need to support and what we need to do for our immune system itself. And then our flora is so important to take care of because of all the things that it typically does. Now we know that skin for many people is often to them one of the most important things because it's like, oh, it's what I see. But you have to know that the skin has many other functions than simply making us look good. The dead skin cells and skin cells have a turnover rate about you know, about every month, 25 to 30 days, somewhere in that. So, you know, on an everyday basis, you have thousands and thousands of cells on the outside that are basically dying and are sloughing off, being replaced by other cells. Beneath the surface of the skin, of course, are our sweat glands and our oil glands. They contain antimicrobial chemicals. We have hair follicles because, you know, just like whiskers on a cat or on a dog, when they are getting into a small space, if their whiskers touch that they know that they're going to be confined, they may not be able to get their body coming behind through that particular space. So the skin itself is the first line, and it's no accident that, you know, we have hair. It's no accident that we make sweat. It's no accident that we make oils. These are all ways that the body keeps turning things over as the first line of defense. So these secretions are important. It's therefore important not to stop these secretions because these secretions give a pH that is for the most part inhospitable to many microbes and doesn't allow them to colonize on the skin. When that pH is altered or you know, in some way affected, and lots of things that we put on the skin does that, it alters the pH, which makes it, for all intents and purposes, more susceptible to some of these types of challenges and problems that people will ultimately will have in the long term of things that are going on. Mucus, as I said, mucus is not a bad thing. Mucus is something that we want to be mindful of, and we don't want to basically stop it from coming out. You see that picture with this person coughing, you know, and that's what they say, that's how you spread germs, so-called microbes, which is why when you cough, the whole idea is you cover your mouth as much as you can, or with a Kleenex or a tissue. We also have these cilia. These cilia are like little hairs. and they literally are constantly moving mucus. They're constantly moving bacteria, microbes to the tube so that they can be coughed out or spit out, or in some way the body gets rid of them. So they will entrap the microbes. They will also allow things to be moved to the surface. They're an incredibly important part of this. And this mucus, as I said, contains these enzymes that help to destroy bacterial cell walls and washes out the viruses, that washes out the bacteria. So, which I hope you got the idea now. The worst thing you can do for a cold and a flu is to suddenly try and take something to dry it up. That's the last thing. In fact, you would prefer to take something that actually increases it. What increases it? Water. So water fast is always a good idea to do during a cold, because it will allow your body to create this to literally wash it out, which is exactly what we're in biological medicine, the way we like to approach this. So what's the first thing we do if you injure your finger? Is you stick it in your mouth. And that's excuse me, not just habit, but the saliva. Our saliva is so critical. And once again, back in Louisville, the aspect of the importance of saliva was discussed. It has a lot of different chemicals. It's not only for breaking down our food, but it's the first line of defense about any microbes that somehow get into our mouth, and what the body ultimately has the ability to do with it. The same with stomach acid. We know that, as that picture a minute ago showed, gastric acid should be about a pH of 1. The scale is from 1 to 14. Our blood is right in the middle at about 7.2. And every different organ in our body has a different pH for different reasons, because of what typically it would be exposed to. So pH is one of our immune defenses. So anything that we do that is altering anything that I've said so far is going to have, unfortunately, a negative impact on your immune system. And people tend not to realize that, oh, these things I'm putting on my skin are not good for my immune system. Correct. Taking medication to stop mucus is not good for immune system. Correct. Doing something that changes the pH of your stomach is not good. Correct. So we have all these types of things, but it's like, oh, we wait till we have sickness or have a problem that we realize that there's a problem. So if we think of the digestive system, the human body, as a hollow plastic tube, the inner surface of this tube is our digestive system. The outer surface of that tube is your skin, and then what's in between the two is the rest of your body. So we have the digestive system, and technically, let's say if you were to swallow an alley, a marble, maybe an alley is a Canadian word, I don't know. A marble, we'll say, in the United States. Does it really get into your body? And the reality is it doesn't, because it stays within this hollow tube and literally passes right on through. So it doesn't get inside your body. The only way you get inside your body when it passes beyond the cells of the digestive system. And how does it get out of your body? Well, it comes all the way out through your skin, through sweat, for example, or through the oils of your body, or it comes out through the different organ systems, through urine, through the stool, through breath, etc. That's how things get out of the body. So some things, literally, even if you put them in your mouth, never really get inside your body, even though if you swallowed a marble, you say, well, yeah, it's inside my body. Well, actually, it isn't. It's in your digestive system. That's literally a long, hollow tube, which is what in Louisville I talked about specifically in one of the presentations. So everybody thinks bacteria are bad. These bacteria, these E. coli bacteria, are living outside your body because they're in the digestive system. So if that's where they live and that's where they stay, we don't have a problem. The problem is if they somehow get through the barrier and into the body. Well, now it's a problem. But it's because each and every one of us has trillions of these E. coli bacteria. If it gets into your bladder, you're going to have a bladder infection. If it gets out of your intestinal tract, it can cause all nature of different types of problems. So keeping a healthy digestive tract, obviously, is another important aspect of supporting our immune system, which would mean the use of things like probiotics, the eating foods that don't, create allergies, eating foods that we're not allergic to, that because we have leaky gut and that type of thing. So adaptive immunity is our second line of defense. This is based on resistance that builds up over our lifetime. It does rely on some genetic components for what's going on. It does respond slowly, as opposed to the first line of defense that's immediate. It takes a few days because, once again, it's like we're gearing up machinery to basically, because if it was constant, we'd spend all our energy just trying to keep these soldiers in the army, but they would have no fight to fight. So that's a huge waste of energy. So it's very specific, and if you're exposed to the same type thing more than once, then the response becomes quicker and quicker. This clonal expansion is a term that I don't want to get into here, but it has to do with how the immune system defends itself. So here we have these T cells, white blood cells that we call phagocytes. You see that picture on the right, literally sending out this long pod. I mean, these cells are not just a round static thing. They're very active. They're very dynamic. You see the one on the left sending out all these like little antennas, and they're all out there feeling and trying to protect you from some type of a foreign invader. There are two different types of T lymphocytes made in your lymph nodes from your lymphatic system, which we say again, it is so critical that your lymphatic system is healthy, it's stayed in balance, it's constantly in motion, you're constantly supporting it in a positive way. So when the invaders get inside the body, once again, inside the body means it's passed out of the digestive system, it's got through that barrier, but it's not out of the skin. So it's in between those two layers. So this is when this line of defense comes into attack, and you see that in that bottom of that picture, you see the green bacteria. You see this little foot that's moving out. It's about to engulf that bacteria, so that bacteria will not be allowed to in any way have a negative impact on the body itself. So they're responsible for engulfing something foreign to us. We say the phagocyte breaks these particles down into these organelles that are inside the body. Now, when those cells are under attack, they release a product called histamine. Now, some of you are familiar with histamine, especially if you have allergies or are subject to allergies, because histamine is what causes the mucus to be made. It's what causes you to feel uncomfortable when you're having an allergy attack. But it's also what allows the immune system, the neutrophils, one of the cells, to be attracted to where the bacteria are, so that it will literally gobble it up. And so, once again, we look at histamine as being a bad thing. No, it's a necessary reaction. And so if somebody has allergies, what do? They take antihistamines to try and stop the reaction so they don't feel so miserable. So once again, we're going against a natural physiologic process. Anytime we go against natural physiology, we're going against biology, which means we're going opposite to what biological medicine attempts to practice. And we're into the area of allopathic medicine, which is opposite medicine, which is what the standard type of medicine is at this point in time. So we're trying to minimize and prevent that from happening as these things are attacking. So you see these pictures of these cells, literally, let's say they're like Pac-Man. They also will eat up destroyed and broken down cells, and they're attracted by inflammation that is a response of a cell that has been damaged. So of your white blood cells, and when your doctor does a blood test for you, one of the things that they commonly measure is what we call a CBC, which is a complete blood count. It not only is looking for white blood cells, it's also looking for red blood cells, and it'll look for platelets, etc. So it's looking for, in the area of immunity, we look at these white blood cells, and about 60% of the white blood cells are what we call neutrophils. This is a normal differential. You know, it could be 50, somewhere in that range. The numbers go way up when there's an infection going on. However, they're short-lived. They die after they basically eat a bacteria. And if you've ever had any form of a pustule or an abscess and that, and you see this white material in there in the pus, that pus is mostly dead neutrophils that have basically digested all these bacteria. And so that's the way that the body tries to wall it off in order to get rid of it. Macrophages are another one of the white blood cells you see in that picture there. And the red cells that you see in that picture are the red blood cells. That's what's carrying around oxygen. And so scattered throughout the red blood cells, which far outnumber the white blood cells, which, you know, you see, but the white blood cells are obviously much bigger, and they're colored, they're stained, which is why you see them like that, than the red blood cells. These macrophages are long-lived. They're made in the bone marrow, which is why the bone marrow also is important part of our immune system. The monocytes are in the marrow, and once they get to the cells, we call them macrophages. So they're more Pac-Man. All these things are Pac-Man is the easiest way of thinking about it. I mentioned earlier that viruses hijack our cells. So this is what a cell looks like, an electron microscopy, where it's, you know, many thousands of times of resolution. And then this is what a cell looks like when it's been infected by viruses. And I said, whoa, no wonder I'm tired. So all those viruses say, oh, well, I want energy and I want fuel. And the body says, well, I guess what it's supposed to be doing, it can't. And so one of the most common things, of course, when people have a viral infection is they're much more tired. Well, that's because the viruses have invaded the cells, taken over the machinery, and is stealing all the energy that the cell is supposed to be making for you, and instead it's making it to grow more viruses. So you know, that's a pretty dramatic picture there, that you see the difference between the two. The interferon, people with different types of conditions, most specifically something like hepatitis B or hepatitis C. Interferon is one of the types of therapies that's given. People who have multiple sclerosis, interferon is a typical remedy that's given on a fairly frequent basis, weekly in many cases, depending on which agent it is that you're talking about. So basically, interferon is a chemical which can prevent the attack of viruses, but also, you know, other aspects of the immune system itself. So these T cells, or natural killer cells, recognize infected human cells and cancer cells. So these T cells go out there and say, oh, this thing's full of viruses, we're going to attack that. Or maybe it's Lyme, which is a bacteria that lives inside the cell, and says, and that's why antibiotics are hard to work, because they're inside the cell. If they were outside, they'd be easier to get at, but they hijack the machinery of the cell, hide from the body, and, you know, the mucus layer, will say, needs to get broken down in something like Lyme or any other types of things. So many of you have had are aware that when you have a bite, or you know, you have an injury, you have things happen. We call it inflammation. The inflammation, once again, releases chemicals. Once again, we said histamine. And what happens when histamine is released, you get, like that picture shows, the capillaries once again, Canada, the US, dilate, and you have all that redness. People say, oh my God, look at this bad infection. That may not necessarily, you see, it's pretty obvious where the initial bite was, with that dark spot, you know, almost in the middle of that. And what's happening is that the body is releasing these pyrogens. These pyrogens go up to the brain, the hypothalamus, that turns on the thermostat, and you get a fever. So, and also that's painful. Why? Because the brain says, don't use that body part, because we need to heal it. So we got millions and millions of white blood cells come to that specific area, just like sharks would come to a drop of blood from miles away in the ocean. So our white blood cells will do that. So these are the signs of inflammation: heat and redness, fever, swelling, loss of function. And so here's a little picture that I found that is kind of cute. So you have pain usually associated with it. Why? So you keep using it. You get swelling because all this extra fluid is going to the area. It gets red, it gets hot, you have a fever, and of course then he says, well, don't use the body part. That is the typical signs of inflammation. This is the physiologic reaction that happens inside the body, that's happening millions of times an instant when it's trying to deal with something that the body feels is foreign to it. This is sort of, as I said, is the histamine relapse. This is the adaptive immune response that people have. Why do we have inflammation? Because it's a signal to trigger up the rest of the immune system. The histamine causes fluids. That's why we get swelling. One of the reasons we get swelling for other reasons, nothing to do with histamine. And the temperature goes up, so we get a fever. Fevers are not bad. Fevers are to be celebrated. The goal would be to have a fever once or twice a year because it's a great tune-up for this aspect of your immune system. Fever is one of the best antimicrobial agents ever invented. It's much better than an antibiotic. It's much better than even herbal products to try and, we'll say kill things. Fever, why do we put food in the oven to cook? Because when you heat it up, if there's any microbes, they won't survive that high heat. We know when you eat raw foods, you're much more susceptible to the potentially a gastroenteritis or some type of an infection, because the body can't heat it up high enough to basically to kill those particular organisms. So now we have the specific defense system, which is the third line that's going on. More different types of cells. These are our major players in that particular aspect. So the antibody, which is a term that I've mentioned a few times, is simply a protein. Antibiotic is something that our body produces. No, our body doesn't produce it. Our body is exposed to it mostly by orally, but it can be via an injection also. And then an antigen is something that is not me. It's not self for what's going on. So an antibody itself looks like this Y with these two little outside, that we call them long and short chains. Those are proteins, and they have specific configurations on them that we sort of as like a lock and key. And because each antibody is specific to the antigen has specific configurations. The antibody has the opposite configuration, and when you lock it in, basically you tie up the bacteria or whatever it is that is antigenic, so that the body will have the ability to fight it. So most infections, thankfully, never make it into this particular third line of defense. Those that do, however, make it here will trigger the release of antibodies, as I've just suggested. So we have these two identical heavy chains. These are the long ones. Those would make up the Y. And these two identical light chains. There are 5 types of antibodies that we typically speak about: IgG, IgM, IgA, IgD, and IgE. And they also have specific purposes for what the body needs to do. So they act as a label. That's how that's how the body identifies something that's foreign to it, so that they're able to present the antigen to the phagocyte. So that's what it's doing. What does the phagocyte do? It gobbles it up like the Pac-Man does. It just eats it all up. Some, however, act as antitoxins, where they can block the toxins like diphtheria and tetanus toxin. Some will basically attach to a bacteria, the flagella, which is their motor unit that makes them move around and makes the phagocytes be able to catch up to them. And some cause them to clump together, which makes it less likely to spread. So you can construct tens of thousands, if not millions, of antibodies based on specificity. Just like if we shuffled 52 cards, the number of combinations is quite large because of, you know, all the permutations, combinations. In fact, how you would figure it out is you would multiply 52 by 51 by 50 by 49 by 48. You go all the way down to 1, and you can imagine how big that number is. That's the number of possible combinations that you would have in a card deck. And when we put more than 52 players into the mix, we have literally tens of millions potentially of different types of antibody productions. So these are some of the key ones: IgG, IgM, IgA, and Ig. Use IgG as IgD is not there because it's a less common player, but nonetheless, you know, what's important is to look at, for example, under the IgG, you see the picture that basically that we call that it's a single unit, whereas the IgM, you see that there's 5 units attached there. IgA has 2 units attached, and then the IgE has a single unit attached. So here's our 5 classes again, and each class of antibody has specific prevalence. They are in a specific place. You know, they have a specific function. Well, there's no sense having 5 if they all had the same function. So they do different things, and so we constantly need to be not thinking about just one, but we need to be thinking about multiple effects of these different antibodies. So the white blood cells will gobble up the particles, it breaks them down, and then they show that particle to a T lymphocyte that identifies the pieces and then finds a specific cell to basically take care of it. Now that's, I mean, it seems pretty simple. So most immunoglobulins are actually IgG immunoglobulins. They are secreted in high amounts when the body is exposed to something. They do cross the placenta, so this is how mom offers some protection to the baby, the fetus at this point. Through breast milk will be another way, obviously, and we'll see some of the components of that. So IgG, it neutralizes toxins and microbes, so it's pretty important to have IgG on board. It also does a number of things, as well as protecting the infant, will activate these other things within your immune system itself. IgM is mostly secreted during a primary infection. However, it cannot cross the placenta. The major functions are, with first exposure, IgM is made. And so if any of you have had any of these immunoglobulin tests, for example, let's say Epstein-Barr virus, which is incredibly common, unfortunately, in our population. And so you may see that you have if you have mononucleosis, let's say, you have a sore throat, you can't swallow, you've got swollen lymph node, your spleen is a spleen on this side is a swollen and tender. Oh, you know, an IgM will be high. It's like, oh, you have this, and then we look for it specifically to figure out what specific it is. Monomeric simply means that there's just this one strand when it's in the serum, but now you have 2 types of antibodies in the gastrointestinal tract. So IgA is an important immunoglobulin along lining. So it's in your lungs, it's in your digestive system, and so if things are broken through, IgA hopefully will be around to try and take care of these types of things. So once again, it's neutralizing microbes and toxins. IgE is the one that the allergy sufferers are not happy with, because this is the one that mediates an allergic type reaction. It is the one that is associated with people who have anaphylactic reactions, which we'll talk about in a sec. In general, IgD, I said IgD is the one that we talk about the least. It's the least populous of all of them. Not that it's not important, but at this point, even we're not even sure what it's supposed to do. We see IgM goes up first and goes down very quickly. IgG goes up second and stays around longer. And then when we have a second stimulus, the IgG comes into play much more often, much more quickly. So once again, just a reminder, innate is always there, adaptive is specific. There's a memory versus no memory. One is present at birth. It's in our tears, it's in our barriers, etc. So there is an important distinction. And it's important that you do everything you possibly can to support both these specific areas of our body. That's the same type of an issue. So just how do we get these two types of immunity? So naturally acquired, the innate immunities, once again, is through exposure to antigens or pathogens that basically enter our body naturally, which is what's supposed to happen. The body generates an immune response to these antigens, and the immunity will be lifelong. That's why it's a lot better to have chickenpox than to do a chickenpox vaccine. If you have chickenpox, you'll have permanent immunity. If you have a vaccine, you won't have permanent immunity, because we're now realizing that these immunizations are not that as effective as was once thought. They run out. They supposedly need to be redone, and that's often true. Naturally acquired passive immunity are antibodies passed from mom to the baby via the placenta, or when the baby's born through breastfeeding. Initially, the colostrum is the first milk, we'll say, that's basically is being produced. It's laden with a lot of protective agents, because for all intents and purposes, the baby is immunologically sterile other than what it's got from its mom. So, and at this point, there's no immune response to antigens, because the baby doesn't have much of an immune system, period. The immunity, however, is short-lived, only for a few months, but it does allow the time for the baby's immune system to start to develop. But that takes many, many years to be able to do that. So naturally acquired active immunity, you, the individual, are making the antibodies. You get exposed to an antigen, something foreign to you, and the body then makes these antibodies and remembers it for potentially future exposure of time. The passive immunity is you're not making the antibodies. That's where the breast milk, again, the colostrum, this is where the baby is getting their first. And of course, if the baby didn't get that, they would be highly susceptible to anything in the environment. And so nature is taking care of it by being able to do that. And that immunity will be there until those antibodies eventually die off. And of course, they eventually die off. We also have, so that's naturally acquired. We also have artificially acquired. This is where immunizations are coming, excuse me, come into play. So the idea is that if you're exposed to something through a foreign medium called a needle, so that the whole idea is the body is supposed to then start to react to an antigen. However, it doesn't always work that way. So we have, that's one aspect of getting it, and then we have these artificially acquired passive immunity, and these where you actually get preformed antibodies, which are anti-serum. That's like when somebody gets bit by a rattlesnake or a rabid animal. You have these preformed antibodies to try and start creating some type of immediate response for the individual, unfortunately, before the person may die of whatever it is that they've been exposed to. So we have naturally acquired, you have the antibodies, or they're passive where you don't make them. You have artificial through vaccines or these anti-serums. So this is the idea. The nasal ones are, especially more recently, didn't seem to be as effective as injecting them, but that's subject to some aspect of debate also. Such a couple of brief slides on vaccine history itself. Way back in, with smallpox, Jenner was 1796, long time ago. 225 years ago, 220 years ago. Basically, he took the discharge, we'll say, from somebody who had smallpox, and he just put it in sores and rubbed it on the skin. Then we had the idea of vaccines. This is what's Jenner started in 1796, as I said. Basically inoculated the secretions, and the boy was immune to smallpox. So that was the first recorded history that that type of thing happened. And so this is what's supposed to happen. This is what so-called a flu shot, or to children in this particular state in Arizona. Before age 5, children are exposed to 56 different immunizations, which is like, it's a big load on the system. So, you know, that's a whole different debate, not one I wish to get into. But theoretically, what's supposed to happen is that the vaccine is supposed to have killed bacteria or viruses or protein bits of those types of things from those microbes. Those microbes are then, those proteins are then recognized as something foreign. It's called an antigen to our immune system. It creates a mild inflammatory response, which is why at the site of the injection, it may get a little tender, it may get a little hot, it may get a little red. That's your typical inflammatory reaction that happens. And then the idea is you're going to make activate some T and B cells, so that if when in the future you're ever exposed to it, you know, it will come into action more quickly. That's the theory. That's what's supposed to happen. But unfortunately, that's not always what happens, because we know that it's fraught with some errors. It's fraught with the fact that there's so many other potential factors that come into play of whether that may be helpful or not. For example, if you're diabetic, in my experience, diabetics who get flu shots throws off their blood sugar by 50 or 60 points, and it takes months, without increasing their insulin and all that, to try and get it under control. So it's a problem. That's just a summary of what I've just been talking about. Here's the for the key areas for our immune system. So in the middle, it says balanced immune system, optimal effectiveness. If the immune system is overreactive, what we see is we have an allergic reaction, or alternative to that, we have an autoimmune reaction that's going on. And that's a question about autoimmunity. Disease is often described as the body attacking itself. That is correct. But is it really the body trying to attack bacteria that have managed to permeate the cell walls? Well, that's a possibility, but it doesn't always have to. It's probably more viruses. It's like, for example, type 1 diabetes it's well known that type 1 diabetes usually follows in 3 to 4 weeks after an exposure of some type of a viral illness. So we can assume that the body has somehow geared up. So that's not the only reason. There is other reasons why autoimmunity is enhanced. It's usually an imbalance throughout one's entire system. Hashimoto's, which I suspect some people listening tonight have. It's one of the most common autoimmune problems. There's a high cross-reactivity with gluten intolerance. In fact, one of the most important treatments of Hashimoto's is to not eat gluten foods because of the fact that there's a cross-reactivity. Allergies, you're going to get a whole webinar, next month. I think the 28th of June is the date on allergies specifically. That's the only component we're going to talk about, or allergies. But we also have the immune system that is underreactive in the form of cancer, underreactive in the fact that it doesn't weed out these cancer cells. And then in the area of infection, also it becomes an issue or a problem because the immune system hasn't been able to defend itself adequately for what needs to happen. So these are the 5 areas that happens when we say the immune system fails or isn't adequate enough. Or sometimes you can have pathogens that are incredibly violent. You can have violent reactions, and no matter how good your immune system is, you need some additional support because the immune system, it gets so overwhelmed it can't deal with it. The common example would be meningitis. Very, very serious illness, very fortunate, high risk, high potential of mortality. If you've had the unfortunate opportunity to know somebody who've had specifically bacterial meningitis, it can be incredibly devastating. There's pockets of it. We hear about it in colleges. Viral meningitis makes you really sick, but at least you probably won't die and you won't lose your body parts. Unfortunately, with bacterial meningitis, it spreads so fast, even if you're doing IV antibiotics, it's still, you can't get ahead of it. And what they end up doing, unfortunately, often is amputating a limb. Could be an arm or a leg, or it could be both the legs, or worst case scenario, I know when I was in Portland, there was a gentleman in Vancouver, Washington, just across the river from Portland, who was a healthy man. Unfortunately, got meningitis. 3 weeks later, left the hospital with basically no arms and no legs because they couldn't stop the infection. He survived, but unfortunately, he had no limbs to carry on the rest of his life. So we look at immune deficiencies. There are both inherited and acquired immune deficiencies. I'm going to talk just very briefly about each of these, and said next month there's going to be the entire webinar will be on allergies themselves. So the inherited aspects of things are genetic defects. So there are such things, defective genes, unfortunately, that interfere with both cellular and humoral type of immunity that's going on. But we also have acquired immune deficiencies. The one that I'm sure have all heard of is AIDS, where the immune system basically has gone out to lunch. The HIV virus has attacked the T cells, and we have no immune system. There have been great strides made since it was first introduced back in the 70s and 80s, although it's still a pretty devastating illness. Severe combined immune deficiency, a genetic condition in which one or more genes for proteins crucial to the immune system are defective. Once again, a very, very serious condition. You try and now that we know something more about genes, which we've only known that in the last 15 years for all intents and purposes. They try to do gene therapy. Obviously, we don't have a good answer to that. Thankfully, this one is particularly rare, but for anybody who would acquire those genes, it's particularly devastating. This one is so common. It wouldn't be surprised me if over half the people this evening who are listening have allergies at this time of year, or maybe it's in the fall, or maybe it's all year round, if it's mold, or if it's cats, or if it's dogs, or if it's pollens, or whatever, grass, those types of things. So we have both an immediate hypersensitivity reaction, and we have a delayed hypersensitivity reaction. The immediate are by antibodies, the delayed are by these T cells, like contact. So you have a ring and you react to the gold or the metal in the ring, and it itches and gets red. That's sort of a contact dermatitis. So an allergy is is a reaction to something that normally it should be harmless. For all intents and purposes, pollen shouldn't be causing a problem. It gets into your respiratory system. Those proteins, the body reacts against them, and so it starts making mucus, and you tear, and you cough, and your nose runs, et cetera, et cetera. And so the immune system is in this hyperreactive state. So once again, we have mast cells involved, we have histamines involved. So very commonly, antihistamines are the way that this is being approached. Is that the best way to do it? It's a way to help you feel better, but it's not a way to address the problem. And I'll talk next month about the whole idea. Well, what about allergy shots? Is that a reasonable alternative? So once again, I'll save that for next month. Transplant rejection. Anybody who's had a new kidney, or a new liver, or a new heart, or whichever organ has been transplanted, unfortunately often has to stay on pretty high dose medications that will suppress immune reactions against that. It's understandable. It saves the transplant, and you have to deal with the adverse potential effects of taking those specific types of medications. Cancer is, the immune system either does or does not effectively recognize the fact that the cancer cell is a sort of a changed cell. It's an altered cell. And so our immune system should be able to recognize it. It doesn't, and these cancer cells, unfortunately, have the opportunity over many, many, many years to develop. You, of course, are familiar, as most people are, that lung cancer was associated with smoking. And you look when people really started to smoke, 50s and 60s. Now we're 2018, and the numbers are, have continued to increase, although they feel that they're leveling off, but they're still not really leveling off. And so it's the effects of 20, 30, 40 years of abuse to the lungs that the lung cancer. And then there's people who smoke and never get lung cancer. Maybe they get bladder cancer instead. So, it depends. Smoking is not just a lung problem. It's an overall body problem. So we have challenges in cancer patients for what the immune system is doing. The immune system, of course, is not supposed to attack itself. This is ensured by eliminating these autoreactive lymphocytes when they're developing. That's part of how their body is trying to protect itself. However, there are over 80 recognized autoimmune diseases which can attack any tissue. So it's incredibly common. It's a worldwide problem that people have. It can be specific tissue, or like thyroid, or it could be like lupus or multiple sclerosis, where you have multiple areas of the body that's involved. So here's just a list of a few of these: rheumatic fever, rheumatoid, ulcerative colitis, et cetera, et cetera. And it's always been said, and what I learned in medical school is that autoimmune disorders are not curable. That is not true. They are curable. In fact, every disease is curable when you basically approach it not from just trying to stop a reaction, but by trying to understand the reaction. And the things that we'll talk about in just a sec are a big part of how we can prevent somebody from having that. I found this cute picture, and I thought it was a great picture: how to build and maintain a healthy immune system. So you can imagine if you were that mom of that little baby, little toddler, if it's licking the nose and snout of that pig, where you just wonder where that nose went. And the reality is that kid was probably healthier because of it. And we know from an allergy perspective, if you want the least likelihood of getting an allergy is basically to grow up on a farm that has pigs and cows and chickens and dogs and cats, and you live outside and you have 3 siblings. That's your chances of allergies are much less if you grew up in that environment than if you grew up in the sterile environment, let's say of an inner city or a city somewhere where you were lucky to see a tree and some grass. And you antimicrobial soap on everything, and you used wipes and all that kind of stuff, thinking you were going to sterilize your environment, which by itself is a huge problem, because that is actually making us sicker as a society, as an environment. So we know these things will weaken your immune system. Stress, I think the first one we did, I think, was on stress, or maybe that was the one I did in Louisville. I've done so many presentations lately. Exposure to toxins. It doesn't have to be cigarette smoke. It can be, just look under your kitchen sink, look under your bathroom sink. You say, what in there is a natural product? Yes, we need some of these types of things, but the reality is these types of things should be stored outside your living quarters. If you have a garage, that would be great. If you have a backyard with an attached shed, that would be better. The farther away from your everyday, exposure would be preferred. It goes without saying that the diet in North America is very suspect. We call it the SAD diet, Standard American Diet. That's wrought with processed foods. It's wrought with processed sugar, trans fats, poor quality fats, a lot of boxed foods that are not really natural foods. They're basically the conglomeration of just a few ingredients, probably as few as 10, in addition to additives. Because if you were to take every processed food and you take out all wheat, you take out all dairy, you take out all sugar, you take out all soy, and it's like, well, what's left? And not a lot in a lot of these processed foods. Thankfully, we have places like Whole Foods and that type of thing where we can actually find. And interesting, this may not be true, but it was a few years ago. Statistically, the place where the most organic food is sold in the United States, I can't guarantee it for 2018, but a few years ago, was Walmart. believe it or not. And that's because of the volume. So they do sell organic food in Walmart, and you don't only have to go to Whole Foods and those types of places. So there is some awareness, and of course those are continuing to increase. And some of those stores have made sort of a commitment to increase those types of things. It goes without saying that not enough sleep has a tremendous detrimental effect on your immune system. Aging, that doesn't mean that just because you're getting older, you can't do something about it. We can do a lot about it. Sugar and alcohol, pretty much deadly for your immune system. So certainly things that you want to mostly stay away from. If you were in Cape Cod or in Providence a month ago, you saw me talk about this in great detail for a couple of hours. The natural laws. These are the so-called natural laws that we want people to live by, to get outside every day, to do something fun every day, to take a minimum of 100 deep breaths consciously on a daily basis. And when you take a shower, to turn the hot down first, to move your body on a regular basis, castor oil packs generally in the evening, dry skin brushing before you get in bed. Try to get in bed between 10 and 11 with no Wi-Fi, sleep in the dark, use an eye mask if you need. Raise the head of the bed from 4 to 6 inches to improve your lymphatic circulation, and daily prayer and meditation. Those are all natural laws to live by. Every one of those will help your immune system to get stronger. In addition to that, we know that there are supportive nutrients, specifically antioxidants, that you find in foods, mostly foods of color, which is what we're mostly going to be wanting to talk about. But we can break it down also, specifically vitamin A has a specific support. You see what it ultimately is doing. The areas that if you're deficiency in, potentially will show up, but it affects the growth and functions of B cells. It promotes a response to bacterial infections. Therefore, vitamin A is a great remedy in somebody who has an acute respiratory problem. So we know that a diminished function diminishes innate immunity. So because it's supportive on mucous membranes and phagocytes, etc., those are some of the foods that you find it, and we will minimize the impaired B and T cell responses. Vitamin B is literally good for everybody and everything. It's one of the nutrients I think that you can't go wrong with. A water-soluble vitamin, and you see all the different types of vitamins, how they have a positive impact on the immune system itself in a very positive way. Most people are aware of vitamin C thanks to the work that Linus Pauling did many years ago as the only double Nobel Peace Prize winner. That has major antioxidant effects. It has major antiviral activity. So boosting up your immune system, your vitamin C level on a regular basis, in addition to eating lots of different colors of fruits and vegetables, will be a great way to take your vitamin C. Does vitamin C help for colds? Yes, it does. But why? Because it makes collagen. So anybody who's worried about wrinkles and collagen breaking down, vitamin C should be a go-to immediately, not just waiting for you to have a cold. Because usually in the summertime, we tend to eat more fresh foods, including fruits and vegetables. We tend to think there's probably a greater need in the wintertime, which is true, although you need vitamin C all year round, not just in a specific season. Vitamin D is also necessary for these phagocytes, these little Pac-Men that go along and eat things that we don't want. Deficiencies have significant impact, and in fact, the vitamin D is from the sun, but you also get it in whole foods. But for many people, it's very difficult to eat enough whole foods to get adequate levels of vitamin D. So this is just a little chart that where should we really be looking at from an immune perspective? You really want to be looking at in the 55 to 65 range. If your doctor says, oh, your vitamin D is fine, and you look at your number and it's like 31, it's fine for bones. It is absolutely not fine for your immune system. So we don't want vitamin D levels just hovering above so-called normal levels. You want them up in the 55 to 65 range because that's where they have the greatest impact for the immune system. Especially, you see, 52 is where breast cancer rates would be cut in half. If every woman had a vitamin D over 50, just think if that would cut. And have you ever seen that ad on television? Take your vitamin D, reduce your risk to half of breast cancer. Why don't we advertise that? That's a lot less expensive than trying to treat it once it's there in general. Obviously, it's not the only factor because there's other things in that because it's not every woman, but it significantly reduces it. So it tells you the importance that vitamin D has. In fact, vitamin D can be used in an acute type of an infection. We say 1,000 units per age of the person. So if a person's 50, 50,000 units a day for 3 or 4 days. Not every day. Looking at vitamin D3, we're not looking at vitamin D2, which I'm not too impressed with. Vitamin E is another antioxidant. Basically helps protect both innate and adaptive immunity. It also protects your heart. So there's lots of good things to say about it. We also have to look at micronutrients. We know that the quality of plants that we're eating, in the salads that we're making, in the veggies that we're making, in the stir fries, etc., are only as good as the ground that the plants are grown in, and they're only as good as the minerals that are in. So if they're good for plants, they're also good for humans. So we know that there's components like copper, like zinc, like selenium that we find in whole foods that have a very important and specific component for the immune system itself. So I don't generally recommend people go out and start supplementing copper, but if you're eating whole foods, you're going to be getting some. I mean, in fact, many people have too much because of copper pipes, depending on how old your house is, for your water supply. Selenium, we tend to think about for the thyroid because it's very helpful for converting T4 to active T3. It does many other things. You'd see the animal products, there was shrimp there and crabs and that type of thing. Zinc is one of the nutrients that's involved in so many immune reactions and so many other types of cellular reactions. It's an antioxidant. It helps control inflammation. People are always worried. It's a great remedy for the skin. It's a great remedy for your hair. It's a great remedy for poor infections. So we see zinc lozenges sometimes being used for people with sore throats. I mentioned earlier probiotics. To me, it goes without saying that this is probably one of the support nutrients that everybody should take on an everyday basis. And so I start my patients literally with a baby first feeding with additional probiotics, even though there are some probiotics in breast milk, which is possible, which there's a whole mechanism how that happens. But since the baby is sterile, immunologically sterile, what we're attempting to do is to support that in every positive way we can. These are two of the most common ones, the lactobacilli and the bifidobacteria, because they strengthen the whole gut itself. An absolute must for everybody. You've probably heard of echinacea. It's an herbal remedy for colds. Some studies have said, oh, it didn't really work. But that study was subject to so many flaws. It actually still is a very beneficial herb to be used in the time of colds and flus. Fatty acids, another type of thing that I think is beneficial to everybody on an ongoing basis, both inflammatory and for the brain, and thus for the immune system. We know we have EPA for inflammation. We have DHA for the brain itself. So if you're looking at how do I improve brain function, DHA is one of the best things you can do for yourself overall. Garlic has been used historically forever. We know that if you have a cold, so putting garlic in your food is a great antimicrobial. One of the interesting things about garlic, it's especially in our microbiome, you can put it in a petri dish with all kinds of bacteria, including lactobacillus, and garlic will kill everything except the lactobacillus. It somehow knows it's normal flora, somehow knows that that's a good thing. Nature is obviously totally amazing. And it says it'll get rid of the things, the pathogen type things, but the things that are supposed to be there, like acidophilus, it doesn't kill. So it doesn't kill it in your body, but it does help keep everything else in the proper balance over time. These are also often commonly promoted foods. Green tea. I think green tea is a great thing to be drinking for a number of reasons. Ginger, echinacea, I mentioned, the black cumin now for inflammation. That's the whole idea of immunity. It's pretty standard treatment for cancer patients, for example. Licorice is a great remedy for our adrenal glands, which helps our immunity. St. John's wort is for our nervous system. So many positive things we can do for ourselves. A couple of summaries. Innate immunity is there, relies on the mechanisms before the microbes even show up. It's our first line. You want to keep your skin in great shape. You want to make sure you have great mucus linings. How do you do that? You drink lots of water, because water is the best thing that will support that. Because there's about 12 liters of water that exchange in our body on a daily basis. About 2 liters of it we pee out. The other 10 liters are literally on all these other mucous membranes in our body. So there's a lot of water in our system. Then it's important to be properly hydrated. Adaptive immunity, our second line of defense, comes into play when we breach the first line of defense. So first line is gone, we got the second line. Eventually we'll get to the third line. So if something, and then we can get these problems with breakdowns, whether it's hypersensitivity / allergy, immunodeficiency, cancer, autoimmune disease, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very complex system. However, taking care of it is not as complex. Following natural laws, doing healthy supportive nutrients, getting enough sleep, minimizing exposure to foreign substances, etc., does absolute wonders for an immune system. And it is truly your best defense against illness of any type. But do remember, you are still supposed to get sick once or twice a year with a fever that you don't try to suppress. So you don't take Tylenol, you don't take Advil, you don't take Aleve, you don't take aspirin. You just get in the bathtub and do an Epsom salt bath. You go to bed, you do mustard plasters, you do warming socks, those types of things that basically will enhance your immune system. Do a castor oil pack, get your lymphatics moving, and you let the body's immune system tune itself up. Those are definitely the key things that we're ultimately going to be looking for. And if there are any questions, you can type them in if you wish, and I'll answer them. A reminder that next month, I believe it's the 28th of June, Thursday night again, we're going to be doing one of these sessions specifically on allergies. June 28th, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. West Coast time, where I am right now. So, and reminder that this presentation will be posted within the next few days. Go to the BRMI site, and there'll be a link there that you can watch bits and pieces of that. And in fact, you could go there now if you didn't hear the first couple, or some of the presentations I suspect are probably posted from Louisville, and certainly presentations from other times. There's a lot of information we're trying to supply you with. There's a lot of great information out there about health, things that you can do for yourself, because it's not about just seeing a doctor to be able to help you with your specific challenges, but our role as a physician is to just help you moving in that direction. But once you've moved in that direction, then ultimately the goal is, what can I do for myself on a day-to-day basis? So Heidi just said all presentations have been posted, so you're going to have an educational, and believe me, that's a lot more entertaining than playing some game on your on your iPad or on your computer. Educate yourself on a daily basis. Learn, and not only yourself, but the aspect of what you can do for your entire family. I missed what iron is good for. My hemoglobin and hematocrit is low, but ferritin is okay since I've been supporting. Iron is good. One of the things we know about iron, in addition for the anemia aspect of that, in fact, all these micronutrients or all these minerals are good for both the adaptive and the innate immunity. So iron not only plays a role in oxygen carrying capacity, but it also plays a role in how it keeps immune cells in balance. So, you know, there's obviously a reason I'm going to make the assumption, since you didn't write it, that your red blood cells are normal. Maybe if your red blood cells are not, maybe that's one of the reasons. You may have enough ferritin, which is the storage form of iron, but you don't have enough red blood cells to pack the iron into, which would be the result of why you may have low hemoglobin and low hematocrit. So it would be a function of looking at that. That may then be a spleen issue, because the spleen is responsible for removing old red blood cells. There's other conditions which break down red blood cells. A bleed, for example, would be possible. You know, or could be just, you may not even be aware that there's something bleeding. Could be a micro in the colon or in the bladder or somewhere else. We know that we lose a little bit of blood after exercise, which is why you should never do a urinalysis if you've had rode to the lab on your bicycle, because you're probably going to find blood in it, and they're going to get all worried and upset, type things. So that would be my take on that specific question. Thank you for participating this evening. I would, and for those of you, I know there will be a number of people who were not able to physically attend because their goal is to listen to the webinar once it gets posted. But tell your family, tell your friends, tell them to join the website. The webinars are / or / whatever they say, you know, webinars. But that website is a wealth of information. It's not just in the webinars. There's also a lot of reading material. We're trying to create an educational resource that will be the place to go if you're looking for the aspect of how we support, you know, the body biologically. You're going to basically find that. Eosinophils are always high. I do have autoimmune. So eosinophils, definitely, unfortunately, you want to be looking at food allergies also. Gluten is historically, if you have autoimmune, I'm assuming your doctor has told you should not be eating gluten. Hopefully that's true, because that's one of the most common overlap triggers with Hashimoto's for sure, but also many autoimmune diseases. And for that matter, gluten has a huge overlap with virtually any neurological problem. In fact, the study done by New England Journal of Medicine almost 20 years ago showed that 58% of all types of, and we're talking depression, we're talking anxiety, we're talking Parkinson's, we're talking MS, we're talking ALS, dementia, anything like that, you have a greater than 1 in 2 chance that gluten is precipitating or a part of the problem. So if you or any of the people you know are dealing with any of those problems, getting gluten out of the diet is a huge step forward to helping you get your organ systems back in balance. All right, everybody, please look at it again. If there's other questions, I'm not sure how you ask them, but we're more than willing to try and answer them however we get questions from you. So once again, we look forward to speaking with you in a month from now. It will be allergies. If you know anybody who's suffering from allergies, they may find it beneficial to spend an hour and a half getting some insights and things that they can do for themselves on a natural basis. All right, everybody. Heidi just said you can ask questions at the brmi.online/webinars. Put questions in there. We'll get them. We'll do our best to answer them. Have a great evening wherever you are. Hopefully it's great if you're where I am. It's about to take my dogs for a walk because it's a beautiful day here. We'll talk to you all again. Great talking to you all. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.